to this issue is to restrict children's access to social media and to require companies operating digital platforms to establish gates through which the age of all users will either be verified, estimated, or inferred. This obviously is bound to have serious consequences on children's rights and their agency, their ability to access information online, privacy, as well as the architecture of how the internet is accessed and by whom. Having recently joined Stop Killing the Internet movement, SFLC.in, in partnership with Open Rights Group, Electronic Frontier Foundation, Stop Killing Games, OpenNet Korea, and Index on Censorship, is pleased to host all the speakers as well as the audience that has joined us here today. Our aim with this event is to understand what are the key problems with this global push for age assurance and what are rights respecting pathway to ensuring children's safety in digital spaces would look like. Today's event is segmented into three parts. The first segment will involve a discussion on how a global landscape for age assurance is evolving and the role of movements like Stop Killing the Internet in pushing back against such mandates. We will be joined by Paige Collings from Electronic Frontier Foundation, James Baker from Open Rights Group, Professor K.S. Park from OpenNet Korea, Moritz Katzner from Stop Killing Games, Nixon E. Williams from Index on Censorship, and John Payne from Electronic Frontiers Australia, who has made an incredible effort to join us at a late hour for this event and to speak about the ongoing situation in Australia itself. Thereafter, we will segue into a roundtable discussion with a larger group of digital rights organizations like EDRI, Paradigm Initiative, CIPESA, Katunga Labs, and Nubian Rights Forum, and experts David Sullivan from the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership, Michael Spector from Georgia Institute of Technology, and Dr. Kim Silvando from Digital Futures for Children's Center at London School of Economics. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's session, Ms. Mishi Chaudhary. Having founded SFLC.in in 2010, she is a technology lawyer and an online civil liberties activist who practices law in New York and New Delhi. She has been at the forefront of advocating for internet freedom, privacy, innovation, and free and open source software. Under her leadership, SFLC.in became the premier nonprofit institution representing the rights of internet users and free software developers in India. I hope you all enjoy the event. A short note, this event will be live streamed and recorded. And without further ado, over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Pranay, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, people from all across, and our dear friend from down under. Sorry for keeping you up so late, but very excited to have you all, mostly because we are curious and we want to understand what is it that everybody unites all across these nations in pushing for legislation, regulations, which seem and ostensibly to be doing something interesting as well as in the name of protection, but has consequences which not everybody has thought through. I think over the last few decades, we have become used to thinking of internet as a place where you just simply arrive. You open a browser, you search for information, you watch a video, join a discussion, say a few nasty things about whichever football team you are rooting for. And I do think the referees are not fair. But play a game, talk to someone on the other side of the world, like all of you. And internet doesn't ask you a very fundamental question. How old are you? For most of the history, at least, unless websites wanted to sell you something, they refrained from that. Now, increasingly, they're being asked to ask this question. It sounds like a small design change, but it changes the relationship between users, the platforms, and the governments. When we started to plan this discussion, one thing was immediately clear, that everyone was talking about age assurance, but we were not talking about the same things. For some people, this is, of course, about protecting children. There's content which should not be at least available online. For others, it's about social media, online grooming, addictive design. For many of us who, of course, analyze from all aspects, also thought about it as a privacy issue, a free speech issue, or the beginning of a much larger shift in how all of us access internet. So, what are we exactly building? Are we building better protections for children? Or are we building this new layer of a digital identity? We are perhaps quietly changing one of the basic assumptions on which internet has operated for decades. And this fair, simple premise that only if you wanted to buy alcohol or open a bank account or enter a casino, proving your age made sense. But if you wanted to read, search, or watch a video, um, why did it matter, all of this? And that is why the entire push from the governments, whether it's the UK government in implementing age assurance under the Online Safety Act, or Australia having gone further by restricting access to certain social media services based on age, all of these developments are not happening in a vacuum. Um, Parents are correctly worried about what children encounter online. Researchers have documented harms associated with recommendation systems, compulsive design, online exploitation, and exposure to material that many people agree our kids should not be exposed to. But um, uh, once a service needs to know whether you're 16, 17, or 18, it first has to decide how will it know. Does your phone tell the website how old are you, or you let AI estimate your age, or you upload an identity document? All of these force us to confront difficult policy questions, and our goal today is to understand the trade-offs before they become embedded in law, technology, and everyday life. And tech, internet has always evolved. And question is about this new evolution. Are we approaching one of those moments that fundamentally changed our relationship, or is it something else? I would love for our speakers to at least speak for 3 to 4 minutes of opening remarks before we move on to the next session. I am a little bit of a stickler for time, other than myself, perhaps, but I think I stuck to my time also. I'll let you know once it's up so that we can hear from everybody. That sets the stage, and then we can move forward. Because John has been very kind to stay up late. And John, we'll send you a packet of coffee, Arabica beans from India somewhere when we see you. But why don't we start now and hear about your experience and what you think this is all about? Over to you.
Thank you, Michi, and also thank you for the coffee. I was going to stay to the end anyhow, so thank you for accommodating and getting me on first. I don't have anything prepared. I'm going to shoot from the hip with a series of thoughts. Yes, you can blame Australia for us being on this call right now. Also, our Prime Minister thinks. Running off to the UN, scouting about the fact we're the first country in the world to introduce legislation to protect kids from the horrors of social media. Unfortunately, not only has our government, to mix my metaphors, used the blunts of instruments, prohibition, to hit the lowest of hanging fruit, being social media access, as opposed to properly defining what the problem is in the first place, realizing that there are risks and harms that are created by social media that don't apply exclusively to children and young people, but to all people, and that the solution is not in prohibition. There's also some concerns around, for example, there's a bit of pearl clutching going on about social media. I'm not trying to diminish the harms that it has caused some families and children and young people. But in reality, when you think about things in a sociological sense, in a cultural sense, going back the last 50 years, there's been a lot of things that have been in the cultural zeitgeist involving kids and teenagers that have horrified children. There were comic books in the 50s, and then there was rock and roll, and then there was hippies, and there was heavy metal music, then MTV generation in the 80s, in the 90s, computer games, 2000s onward, we have the internet, social media, and so on. So, what is a common theme amongst all these generational changes is parents feeling they have less control over their children, and children actually becoming smarter, um, more alive to being digital natives compared to what most of us on the phone are, and being able to express themselves well. So that's part of the problem. For another cultural example is why prohibition is bad. For example, Australia and America and the UK have bad social and cultural problems with binge drinking, and they have prohibitions on getting access to alcohol for children under the age of 18. But conversely, you might look at Europe, where it is very, very common in most of continental Europe for alcohol to be introduced with family meals at a very young age. And you find that children are alert to the risks and harms of alcohol and consume it mostly responsibly. So, what the government is trying to fix by banning is putting young children in a place where they're removing their agency, removing their ability to flourish in a digital environment, an environment which most of us adults probably weren't brought up with, or certainly our older adults. And also creating harms to and unintended consequences for certain subpopulations. For example, the prohibition on social media access can result in harms to the LGBTQI plus community as they go online to seek resources and make connections and find their tribe they otherwise would not be able to do. Individuals that are in a family situation where there may be domestic violence or alcohol and drug abuse problems within the household won't be able to go online and seek succor and seek help, seek resources, or talk to people. Individuals in Australia who live in remote communities certainly cannot, after school is finished, which they may do actually online, go to the local park to kick the football or the tennis ball around because it's 100 k's away. So there are unintended consequences. But the most significant issue is that our government failing to recognize the underlying problem is the harmful design of social media, the surveillance-based data extraction industry and trade and personal data around the world, and the algorithmic behavioral modification that is being foisted upon us as adults and children, as users of tech, and becoming addicted to dopamine hits, which the algorithms provide. So to fix this problem, we need to ensure that we have safety by design in online safety laws for all of us, not just children, and to have stronger data privacy legislation.
Perfect. John, just 10 seconds over 4 minutes, so that's perfect. But I think a very important point about circumvention is unavoidable, and systems may exclude the very people whose rights require special protection. So moving on to our next speaker, Paige, if we may have your opening remarks, please. And I'll start the clock now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us today for this important conversation, and to our friends at SFLC for convening an international global panel to talk about this topic. I think what we've been seeing over the last few years is a proliferation of legislation and policy developments around regulating the internet under the guise of protecting young people. As John elucidated, there are harms that young people, not just everybody online is experiencing, but young people are facing, from doxing to harassment to illustrations or information around self-harm. We know that these harms do exist, but what we also know at the same time is that the internet is an imperative vessel for people to find identities, resource themselves on fundamental information. It's core to free expression and community building. So at the same time, we see that these really pertinent and imperative components to information sharing and community building are being restricted. I'm from the UK and I work with a lot of people across the UK and across the world in. I'm sorry, I have a bit of background noise. I'm sorry if it's a little distracting. I work with a lot of people on policy developments around age restrictions from the UK across the European Union, work for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So doing a lot of this work in the US as well, where more than half states have regulations that restrict people's access to internet based on age, whether it's age assurance, age verification, different mechanisms, different regulations. And the one trend that we're seeing is that this is a relatively lazy attempt to solve a very complex situation. It's easy, it's politically popular, and it's enabling governments to really seem to tackle a problem without knowing what the problem is. And I think a good example of how we got here is to look at the Online Safety Act in the UK. This was first introduced in 2017, so it's been a long process in its initial kind of formulation, and it was to make the UK the safest place in the world to go online. And it expanded from what was slightly more targeted at the time to more than 260 pages of legislation that sought to regulate or protect people from all harms, a vast array of harms. And as many colleagues on the call today can talk to, it spiraled in scale and scope and sought to really do everything without doing anything. Ofcom, the UK's regulator, has been tasked over the last few years with implementing all the different provisions within that regulation and within the legislation. And last year, almost a year ago, next week, the age regulation came in which required platforms to introduce a mechanism to check users' ages. Of course, as John communicated earlier, it doesn't just impact younger people or those under the age of 16 or 15 or 18. It impacts all users. So every user now has to verify their ages to access information. And in the UK, that's based on harmful information. So from pornography platforms to Reddit forums to anything that is kind of swept up in that. Now, I think there are two main components that we often point to as to why this is problematic, although there's a long list, but we can categorize them in two ways. The first is free expression. And so, as I kind of touched upon earlier, the restricted access to information online, particularly for young people who might not have access to this information offline, whether they are physically unable to go to a location, to a library, to a friend's house to find information on perhaps being a queer youth or a trans youth, whether they're experiencing challenges in their home and the internet is where they would seek this information out in a way that feels safe enough to them. And on the flip side, it's provided platforms with a mechanism to censor content that they perhaps just don't want to host. And so in the first weekend of July last year, once this was introduced, we saw that pro-LGBTQ content was being removed or put behind an age gate. We saw that pro-Palestinian content was being put behind an age gate. And so this provided platforms, and James can talk much more to this because they've been tracking much more extensively the kind of platforms and services that have been taken offline or have experienced censorship as a result of this. And then at the same time, of course, we have the privacy component. So this is kind of the second bucket of concern. And that's with all the different ways that users have to verify their ages to access information. The UK has a laundry list of ways, from emails to bank statements to biometric surveillance through Yoti and Persona, which are the two companies we most often see utilized to verify people's ages around the world. not
page.
acknowledging. Am I over? Okay, I'll conclude.
Yeah.
I'll conclude. That went so quickly. Oh my goodness, can talk about this for a long time. I'm so sorry. Okay, I guess perhaps just to conclude and close the loop on the privacy point, what we're seeing is an inadequate guard railing of people's personal information from biometric to their email address, and a reckless disregard of how this can move forward, particularly in the times of data surveillance and data brokers. So sorry for going over, but looking forward to the rest of this conversation.
Great. I think it's when we feel so passionately about a certain topic, and our minds are constantly going through how one articulates one's position, time is bound to fly by. So thank you for that. I'm sure within weeks of this great online safety in which you only speak what certain parties want you to speak, reported some surge in the use of VPNs and other kind of things. But let's move on to Korea now. Kias Park is with us. Kias, you've been doing this work for a very long time, and Korea has shown us very good and bad examples of how we come up with the identifying sometimes the right problems, but coming up with the wrong solutions. So let's hear from you. Over to Kias.
Thank you, Mish. I met Mish for the first time while at the time when Korea used to have a internet real name law, whereby every author of any posting on a major website based in Korea had to register their Korean counterpart to Social Security number, all under the theory that bad content, or the authors of them, should be tracked down, and that will abate proliferation of illegal content online. However, the proportion of illegal content actually increased after institution of this law, because due to the concerns about privacy and due to the lack of, due to the encroachment on the right to anonymous communication, a lot of people stopped writing online. And the bad actors who were doing intentional illegal act online, they continue to do the same thing using somebody else's social security numbers. So as the numerator stayed constant, the denominator shrunk. In some cases, independent media outlets suffered a decrease in their postings by 20. It shrunk to 1/20th of what it used to be. What in terms of proportion of illegal content, it rather increased. So the law didn't accomplish the goal. The goal stated, and the other big issue that the Constitutional Court struck down. The other big reason the Constitutional Court struck down the Internet Real Name Law back in 2012 is data protection. The reason that all the users have to submit their social security numbers with a third party just to write something online, the court thought that it was a disproportionate violation of the data minimization principle. So the law was struck down happily, and but the Korea continued have similar attitude. The Korean government maintained a similar attitude to games, and also harmful to minors content, which forced a lot of content aggregators to maintain age verification. So in fact, still many services that are providing both adult content and non-adult content, they are already they are already requiring age verification for a lot of the services, because they don't want to do they don't want to have a separate login system. They want to have one login system for all different services, adult and non-adult. So that anonymous access to internet is thinning, of course. But now the age verification or the social media ban coming from Australia, that is actually even worse than what the Korean public has experienced, because the goal is not proportionate. In the case of Korea, it is a game. It is the harmful to youth, harmful to minors content that are shrouded behind, covered behind age verification war. But here, it is the entire social media that is, well, in Australia and in other initiatives, what is shrouded, what is put behind the age gate is the entire social media, which really has no proportionate way of justifying the restriction of. So there
Yes.
is, but happily, I should report that I don't think the Korean government is considering adopting a similar law, because Korea already has had a very bad experience with internet games, and I'll talk about that on the second round.
Great. Thank you, KS. From that, because you did talk about games, let's move to Moritz Katzner. Moritz, if you are here, maybe have your statement, please.
Yes, hello everyone. Unfortunately, I can't turn on the cam. I've just been out of a meeting at the European Parliament. Thank you very much for having me. So games, right, keywords. We formed an initiative here in Brussels and in Europe and globally, to be honest, also in the United States, Brazil, Mexico, all over the place, about video games and the digital ownership of video games. Our communities, essentially entire volunteer project, our goal was always that you can preserve the access to what you love, where you engage with your friends, where you grow up, and where you have a safe space to go towards to and have a good time, essentially. And I mean, here in Korea, we already had these restrictions, but our main goal was always preservation. And then we were being told in the European Parliament, well, it's now going to be impossible to host private servers to continue that because you're all going to have 8 checks on you. Then in the United States, we were told that these servers are even going to be illegal if that is the case. So that raised a lot of concerns with us, and we took that as a kind of incentive to form up a more global coalition to fight this, since we've always been of the opinion that these things need to be fought globally. Thus the attempt of trying to form Stop Killing the Internet and bring as many groups together as possible. Stop Killing the Internet, literally trying to be a mirror of our original campaign, and coordinating, giving access to resources, and especially to video games and creator networks online on social media that are in particular being threatened here. And from our experience, I mean, I had a conversation yesterday with a staffer on the Republican side in the United States Congress. He directly told us that no one opposed the KIDS Act, which is the respective example of age verification online and ID verification to Canada, the EU, or what is already enforced in Australia. no one stepped up in Congress and spoke up directly to the present senators and their staffers and Congress members. It was for very weird reasons, we had groups turning up there, having photos with them of their children, being hurt there. And it is a weird thing, who knows Capitol Hill. Normally, you don't have these people turn up there. Normally, all the alarm bells go off then, because that is quite expensive to get there, especially with children, especially with teachers. You're already very short on the dime. Same thing, European Parliament, same thing in London. And that just raises concerns. And when I spoke to them, was like, do you guys know that Meta is pushing for this and investing $125 million each year to lobby for this? Do you guys know who has an interest here? And they were utterly surprised, it seemed to me. Besides Thomas Massey from Kentucky, no one seemed to have been really aware of the issue or been made aware of the issue. Once again, same thing in London, same thing in Europe. So for us, it is extremely important to coordinate everyone where we can, no matter where they are in the world. May that be India, Korea, wherever these experiences. I must admit, I didn't know that these restrictions were already there for Korea. So I just learned something new, something entirely new, which is extremely interesting to know, being able to take that experience, to give that to others and to coordinate with each other and being able to then together fight back against this, since this is being fought by people globally, coordinated globally. And when you look at how quickly and how well coordinated at the same time these proposals always come up, we have to ask the serious question if there aren't people in the background organizing this centrally.
Okay, great. Thank you, Moritz. Let's move on now to James. James, if we may have your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Misha. So this really matters to me on a personal level, because I'm a father myself and I spend a lot of my time with one of my sons. I do a lot of gaming online with them. We do it together as a father and son bonding activity. And the games he plays, you can't learn about them. You can't go to a library and learn how to play a game like Hearts of Iron or Victoria 3. They're complicated games. You have to watch YouTube videos. You have to go on to social media sites like Reddit to learn how to play the game and interact with it. So the idea that he would be prevented from accessing the stuff he needed to enjoy his main hobby, and that was being done in his safety, and it was going against my wishes as his father as to what I thought was best of him, and this has been done in the name of safety. I just felt it was cruel. I mean, he's not every child. There's this narrative like children need to get out into the real world. Well, this is the real world. This is just as much, the internet is just as much a part of the world as any other part of the world. And I'm sorry, sport isn't for every child. If you've got a disability or you just don't enjoy it, some people have terrible experiences being forced into activities they don't want to do in the real world. And their space, their life is online, and that is their social networks, their friends, their communities, the things that they enjoy. And all of that seems at risk of being taken away from some young people in the name of their safety. And I just, on a fundamental level, as a human being, I just think that it's totally wrong. And so I feel absolutely compelled to do something about it. Now, Open Rights Group is who I work for, is one of the organizations that is involved in supporting Stop Killing the Internet as a new movement. I think we're up to maybe about 25, 26 organizations at the moment, and we're kind of talking to them all the time about more people joining it and getting involved. And I think it's really interesting to see this kind of like gamers as a group of people very affected by this stuff, because it's like their main hobby. If you occasionally go on social media or you occasionally go on the internet, this probably doesn't affect you quite as much. But if you are someone who is marginalized or a gamer, or you do something else online, which is your main hobby, this really fundamentally restricts your freedom of expression rights as a human right. So I think you are going to see, as these restrictions come in, I think you are going to see more people campaigning, pushing against it. There's going to be a lot of policy opposition. And then in practice, it isn't going to work because people find ways around it. There'll be other associated privacy harms, data harms, as well as free expression harms. And it fundamentally isn't going to solve the underlying problems, because it doesn't tackle any of the structural issues of social media It doesn't tackle the harmful business models, surveillance capitalism, which cause the harmful design features to be created. You just get these bad analogies all the time, but it's like an addictive substance, but it isn't a substance. It's a complicated system of speech, and some speech could be problematic, but other speech is totally fine. And yet we're now seeing a world where, like online, that speech is facing further restrictions than that speech if it was written in a book. So actually, the online world is facing further censorship and control. The final thing I want to say in my last 30 seconds is I think things like age assurance are kind of like industry marketing terms. Like assurance sounds nice, we're assured of it. I think we should be calling it what it is, which is a form of digital ID, and we should be calling these like age gates a digital ID gate that stops you from accessing things freely. It is a block on your freedom of expression, right? And you have to hand over some of your personal details in some form to do that. And as soon as your personal details get associated with other bits of information about you, that is forming an online ID profile. So, final thing I'd say, let's call it a digital ID check, not age assurance.
Perfect. Good place to, considering we're based in India, to talk about digital ID, which is now exporting it to the rest of the world as well. I would say that it's an interesting question because harms also are real, and parents are not able to actually have the same kind of supervision the way previous generations supervised maybe television, considering the access. So raises interesting questions which we will explore in the next session and see whether governments are actually regulating the user because it is easier than regulating the platform design and the business model or incentives. So we move on to Nick. Nick, may we have your opening remarks, please?
Thank you, Mishi, and thank you everyone at SFLC. So I work at Index and Censorship. We are just over 50 years and started publishing some that tumbled over the border from the over the Iron Curtain, so publishing work by dissidents and artists and academics in Soviet states who were suppressed and censored there. And so the idea of these bans, as we're seeing in Australia, mirrored in the UK always like celebrating us as the Australia Plus model, is obviously something that is deeply alarming. So I think for us, we're a free expression organization. We're not technologists. We're not sort of experts on the internet space itself as an artifact, but we see now increasingly it is the vector through which the majority of people receive their information, communicate with others, as James says, also spend time socially, learning skills, making bonds. It's not just this one little thing that you can carve out as a little part of your life. It is deeply interwoven into our life, not just in service provision, but also these other relationships where social media does play a pivotal role. Like everyone else has said here, we're not blind to the concerns of harm facing children online. These are legitimate concerns, and there's so much awful toxicity online. Most of my day is spent with activists, journalists, others who have been harassed online, who are victims of doxing campaigns, things like this. So there is a lot of horror online, but what we're seeing now is a total smoothing over of the complex and nuanced conversation as to how we do control or grapple with these spaces to what is an easy answer, but then easy answers don't work in what we're looking at. So for every piece of bad content that is blocked by a ban, you have hundreds of pieces of public interest content, whether that's from whistleblowers, musicians, journalists, dissidents, other people who have similar experiences. I think John pointed it out as well. If you live in a tiny town, may not have the best relationship with your parents, who are you going to come out to? Who are you going to learn about things outside of your immediate domain? Social media can play that role. But by banning it, we are removing any fragment of that nuanced conversation as to how we actually navigate these spaces. And as Index, we are very much against bans of content. You know, of course, not an absolutist position, but not as the first port of call. What are the other steps that can be done? I think obviously, as we've seen with the UK, you've got the Online Safety Act, which frankly is just such a labyrinthine, knotty thing that people don't actually know what it is. People don't know how to navigate it, what's happening, what are the pressures placed on people. It's been going, as Paige said, hundreds of documents. You've had Ofcom doing a number of consultations. Ofcom are not transparent and forthright and forthcoming with how they're navigating it. And then you get announcements like the age block on social media, and then the idea of if you're over 16, you can also, if you're under 18, there will be a cutoff point where you can also use online platforms until the evening or something. There's even talk about banning VPN use or age gating VPN use, which luckily, I think today it was announced that the UK government has seen, well, frankly, seen sense and have confirmed that they're not doing this. And one thing I also want to say is I think we saw this a lot during the Online Safety Act discussion, where free expression was in one hand and children were in another hand. And they were totally separate orbs that never intersected. But, you know, I live in Scotland. Scotland has enacted has enforced the European Convention, UN Convention on the Rights of Children. But that also reminds us that children don't get the right to free expression when they turn 18. It's not the ability to drink, join the army. They have it. And of course there are safeguards, you know, and the UNCRC acknowledges that. But they have their right to free expression. So they are being censored. They just don't have the ways to challenge it in the way that others do, or they're not part of the conversation. I've spoken to friends of mine's children about this. They're worried about data use. They're worried about not knowing who their data is going to. They're worried about surveillance. These are people who are really thinking about this, and they've not been part of this conversation. I think like Brazil. I think there's a really interesting conversation in Brazil, but obviously parts of it that are still around the age verification, age assurance bit, which is thorny. Can I just finish this last thing? Because just this last little bit, but they've started the conversation about data protection and preventing big companies like Meta from processing data for young people as part of the data protection shield. And that's a really interesting question. Again, I'm not saying it's flawless, but that's a really interesting conversation about that. And I think bans just it shuts off so many other doors. And that's what we've done in the UK and Australia, and by promoting this approach, we're just shutting off doors to a more balanced and nuanced and complex understanding of this issue.
Great, thank you. You all made my job very easy. I just took notes, and then I'm gonna now set the stage for our second section to ask some questions. I do want to thank you all for your kind of sticking to time, but just really setting the stage about what's happening in different parts of the world. Why is this a concern? I do think that 20 years from now, when we look back at this moment, I wonder, will we see this age assurance, this large umbrella term, as a necessary evolution to protect children, or as the moment the open, anonymous internet quietly became permission-based? And that's why the important issues that come up, what principles should guide us before this architectural shift becomes irreversible? Because these days, small changes travel very fast across the world. In the next section, we are joined by a few other experts on the matter as well, and I would invite them to jump in. But the questions, the kind of ones which I would really urge us to discuss is that there are these harms which are real. Pornography at the scale that it is now available, and the kind of CSAM material which is available through ads. BBCI's recent investigation on Instagram about videos available of kids online is pretty much in the news. But this is also about algorithmic recommendation systems where self-harm videos, eating disorder content, suicide communities, violent material are where, because the well-being is not the objective of the platform and optimization is the objective. These things do exist. The addictive design exists, the grooming and contact does. But where should this legal boundary be? What stops age checks introduced for one purpose from expanding into a general identity layer? And who will be excluded or misclassified by these systems? Nick said earlier, we heard right at the very beginning itself, where would that be? I do think we have more to talk about in terms of our age gating. Is all this protecting children, denying them the rights to privacy information? We generally think of children not having any agency, but that's not true, even from UN. And so there are certain other countries who have adopted legislation. So in the next section, I'll invite a few speakers, but your time would be restricted. And then we will continue to explore several of these questions. I'm gonna start here if Bridget is here from Paradigm Initiative with us. And Bridget, what do you think? What are we doing? Should the regulation focus on the conduct of platforms or harmful recommendation system? What does an enforceable alternative look like? What are you seeing in your part of the world? And where does this shift or paradox as EU is presenting sit?
Thanks a lot, Mishi. So I'll just start by highlighting that within the African context, we're really at a nascent stage when it comes to policies around child online protection or implementation of age verification systems. But we are, of course, starting to see a trend. And as we are looking at it at Paradigm, our work really focuses on digital rights and inclusion, mostly at the intersection of policy, human rights, and technology. And as we see it through the research that we've conducted, I know in the past year, we've conducted research in 29 countries. And throughout all of those countries, we've seen a trend of countries adopting child online protection policies. Of the 29 countries that we researched on, at least 10 of those countries, we're already starting to develop child online protection policies. And this was in 2025, findings from 2025. But as the year started, we also started to see a huge shift as countries such as Egypt, for example, were also starting to announce plans to introduce legislation around regulation of children's use of social media. And this is not just these only few countries. What we've seen within the African context as well, we've seen countries like Gabon, for example, being one of the very first countries to implement child verification systems. And the way we're looking at it, we're looking at an environment where most of the countries within the African continent really have low internet penetration rates, which would then mean that once age verification systems are put in place, this would impact greatly on meaningful connectivity for children and for anyone else accessing the internet. We are in a space where there is so much surveillance of human rights defenders, the media, and this would also add to the plethora of challenges that exist within the continent. And of course, there's also issues around, I did hear, I think one of our co-facilitators here highlighting the need for digital identity systems. At a policy level, this may seem very adequate and very fine for for purposes of age verification. But this presents as a real challenge in communities where some people cannot access digital identity because of a number of reasons, either because they lack initially the national identity to be able to then have a digital identity. So this really presents as a challenge in a number of ways. And within the African region, there's also been recent guidance by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which recently announced a declaration, a joint declaration on the right to freedom of expression and access to information of children in the digital age. This is one of the very first guidance documents within the African region, which really seeks to guide countries on how they can effectively implement policies around child online protection. But we continue to see, like I said earlier, countries such as Gabon, in its recent ordinance, which was announced which came into which was published actually in April 2026. This ordinance really seeks to regulate the use of social media networks, use of social networks via digital platforms to the Gabonese public. Particularly, it also mentions in some of its articles, Article 16 and 17, where it specifies a legal ban for children under the age of 16. So it is really one of the very few countries that is beginning to shape or shape how child online protection within their country will work out. But like I said, within the space as well, as digital rights and inclusion advocates, it seems we're also having a bit of a challenge in identifying the adequate measures or placing head or tail on what exactly should these age verification systems look like. So this is really a concern.
Great.
Because okay. Let me just wrap
Bridget.
up in
Yeah.
at least 1 minute. Yeah. I think also within the policy landscape, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. There's a lot of friction in how the policies are being implemented. But of course, it is up to us as civil society organizations to be able to determine how this should work. I'll stop here for now. Over to you.
Great, thank you. I think Bridget is also raising the right question. When we point out a problem, we are also asked to at least engage with the different solutions. Governments, of course, want a certain fixed thing which can also be executed administratively. There has to be some bright line rule, is what they say. The companies are going to come and say, give us the guidance. What do you exactly want us to do? And as civil society organizations, researchers, people who study this, it's important to go deeper into all of these solutions and point out what's the right way to do this. David Sullivan is here with us also. David, you've consistently argued about that no one-size-fits-all approach to age assurance, whatever that age assurance now encompasses. But governments increasingly seem to want exactly that, a single regulatory answer. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in your corner of the world and what you're really saying? And discuss a little bit more about the trade-offs which are becoming unacceptable. Independent regulators, users, governments, parents, what is the objective criteria we should use? Or each time we will have an issue with one and the other one doesn't fit. So where and how do we address this complicated problem?
Thanks, Mishi. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and thanks for convening this important discussion. So I'm David Sullivan. I run the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership, which is an industry organization that brings together companies that have, that are dealing with challenges around user-generated content and conduct on all types of digital products and services, around creating content-neutral best practices and international standards, where we standardize the practices that companies use to address the risks online instead of trying to standardize what types of content, expression, behavior should be allowed across the internet. So we think that's fundamentally a better approach to maturing efforts across the industry in this space than trying to constrain people's expression and flattening the internet. So we've been working on age assurance for a number of years now. In 2023, we brought together a working group of our member companies to try to identify what is age assurance, starting from the sort of practitioner perspective and bringing together platforms who hadn't really spoken collectively about how they were thinking about age assurance before that, to identify some guiding principles and best practices in this space. And what we found then, I think, holds true now, even though the external policy landscape has shifted dramatically in the last few years. There are many different approaches to trying to have some form of age assurance. Age assurance is this umbrella term, and I can understand why people can be a little bit concerned with it. But just in terms of how practitioners see this, right? Age assurance is the broad umbrella term under which you have hard age verification, age estimation through different means, and inferring age from other data and behavior information online. What we found is that there are trade-offs across every means of age assurance, trade-offs related to the accuracy and ability to circumvent these kinds of processes, trade-offs with concern to privacy and data protection, with regard to accessibility and equity, the affordability of these kinds of projects, and how appropriate they are given the risks of different platforms. And that obviously, the risks related to a pornography or gambling, say, a site is going to be very different from general purpose social media or even something like an online encyclopedia like Wikipedia. So what we have tried to do is to then take the principles and practices that we've identified, which are about really in using risk assessment of risks to young people as part of safety by design at the front end of creating any sort of age assurance component to a product or service, accounting for those risks to privacy, ensuring inclusivity and accessibility, implementing layered approaches where you're not implementing just one hard gate that may not be appropriate everywhere, and being transparent about this work. And we've been trying to integrate those principles and practices into international standards that are under development through ISO, including ISO 27561, which is a framework for age assurance that was published late last year. So what I try to point out is that one, there is a real distinction here between voluntary experimentation by platforms around different forms and measures for some kind of age assurance, and hard mandates and requirements, for different types of services. But that I think while there's value in that experimentation, that runs up against a lot of incentive structures right now, whether that is the incentive structure for the providers of age verification and age assurance services to have mandates that would require the use of their products and services, or the incentives of policymakers to respond to the sort of moral panic that other speakers have spoken to much more persuasively than I have. So in this setting, what I want to be a little bit provocative with the time I have left to just say, there are many reasons that others have already said to be skeptical of implementing this kind of age assurance requirements across the internet. I would say that over the past few years, a lot of the criticism of age verification has tried to make the case that age verification equals identity verification. And I think that case has been counterproductive in many ways, because proponents of age verification, whether it is regulators, including the data protection authorities in countries like France and Spain, or civil society organizations working on these issues, or vendor organizations working on these issues, have been able to persuasively argued to policymakers and courts that privacy-preserving approaches to age verification through things like zero-knowledge proofs can be a valid approach here. And they have been winning those arguments in legislative and judicial settings. So I think we need to have more nuance, really try to push towards not having any single blunt approaches and producing the evidence that shows what could be useful in this space and what is going to be harmful, and recognizing that you can't have it all because there is no approach to age verification that doesn't come with those trade-offs that I started with. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you, David. Nuance is what comes hard for regulators. And generally, it's what is easy administratively, which works for them. I am going to do point out to all of you and encourage you to look at the chat, which is robust and full of great links from our colleagues and partners all around the world who have done some great deep work, starting from a peer-reviewed academic study of age verification, what is happening in different parts of Africa, how do we elevate children's voices, etc. Many of the things which we are discussing here and deep work will help, because this discussion can only accommodate a few things here. I want to next really invite Dr. Kim Silwander and Dr. Kim to talk about an interesting thing, which is basically we're mostly the policy debates, because we, as David rightly said, we want to go a little bit more have more nuanced discussions. We oversimplify childhood itself. There's a lot of your work which tells us about that there's no single right age for social media. Age assurance creates its own problems. We'd love to hear more from you.
Thank you so much. Yes, indeed. We at the Digital Futures for Children Centre at the London School of Economics, which is a joint centre with the Five Rights Foundation, we look a lot at, of course, what does it mean to be a child online, and how do we define children in these spaces? But also, we're always coming from the perspective of children's rights and children's rights from a holistic perspective. And I think, and perhaps last week with the AI for Good Summit, this became very clear that we're in a moment of online safety for children is having a very big moment on the international stage. Everybody's talking about it in relation to social media, but also in relation to AI. It's the moment of the ban, where the ban really is now moving forward in so many places, as many have already talked about. And we're in a political moment in the world where there's a huge pushback against democracy and the freedom of speech. And these things are all now collating into one big messy situation that we're all facing, I think. And from a child rights perspective and kind of leaning against the general comment number 25, age assurance has always been a part of, I think, how the vision of a safe internet for children has been viewed. But with that being said, that doesn't mean that age assurance for age assurance sake, right? And so taking a child rights perspective, children are rights holders, as many have said. We need to consider the best interests of the child, the child's right to be heard, freedom of expression, access to information, children's privacy, access to diverse sources of information, including international sources, which we can see in many countries, of course, is one of the first things to go when states start closing down to foreign influence. And general comment number 25 on children's rights in relation to the digital environment is very explicit, that governments must ensure that digital services are age appropriate and support children's agency as rights holders. But it's also equally explicit that curtailing these rights and children's access to the digital environment as a whole is not an acceptable protective measure. And of course, as you may have seen, Volker Turk and other high UN human rights bodies have in the last few weeks and the last few months gone out and said social media bans are not a silver bullet. They do not solve the core problem, and this is our position as well. They don't solve the core problem, which many have already spoken about today, which is we need safety by design. We can't age gate. I mean, we can, of course, age gate platforms that we believe are harmful, like social media platforms, but it doesn't change that those platforms are still harmful. So as we have, and as we know from a lot of the research that has been presented already, at the moment, we're in a situation where age verification measures are faulty at best, and therefore children will circumvent them. So even if we see them as a normative kind of step towards making sure that children access age-appropriate experiences online, we have a problem where they're still circumventing them, the systems that we have, and then they're still accessing these platforms that potentially are harmful or provide them with harmful content or experiences. And so in that sense, we need to go both directions. We need to make sure that any age assurance tools are enabling tools, first of all, that not necessarily we're talking about gatekeeping, but in an ideal child rights respecting world, age assurance systems would be understood as enabling tools, not for the purpose of excluding children from the internet, but ensure that children encounter the internet in ways that are appropriate for their evolving capacities. And as we know, one problem with age gating is, and maybe some of you have read our paper, which is entitled "There is no right age," which is about children's evolving capacities, and that we know from decades of child development research that children are different, and one individual who is 16 might be very ready to access social media, whereas another might not. But in this sense, we need to also understand that we need to have these kind of tiered experiences. We need to make sure that children, that there aren't these cliff edges. And I know a lot of people have already argued against this kind of cliff edge argument. But in essence, we need to make sure that any age assurance systems that we have in place are child rights respecting in themselves. So not just seeing them as a tool to make or to limit access, but seeing that we need to make sure that they are in fact child rights respecting in their totality. And I think many have spoken to that point, so I don't really need to speak to that further. But they must be privacy preserving, data minimizing, accurate, transparent, and accessible. And unfortunately, what we see across, for example, if we look at OECD's review of the legal landscape across their member countries, they found that requirements are often vague, implied rather than express, and inconsistent across jurisdictions. And so we have a problem also across jurisdictions, of course, and making sure that the regulatory landscape lends itself to achieving what we want, which is a child rights respective age assurance systems across countries that kind of lead to this version of age assurance systems, which is privacy preserving, data minimizing, accurate, transparent, and accessible. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Sylvander, about that. I think there's just so much to unpack here, mostly because identifying who's a child, and then about what does an age-appropriate internet actually look like and for whom. More questions, which is why all of you are together, and I'm glad there are several experts looking into it. I am going to move to Michael Spector, who's with us and has a very, very fascinating paper, which is the empirical study of ecosystem as well. And I'd love to understand, breaking some popular analogies which are going around here and the privacy assumptions behind many laws which are questionable. Michael, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I thank you for that introduction. I'm Mike Spector. I'm an assistant professor at Georgia Tech, where I lead the Security, Privacy, and Democracy Research Laboratory. For context, in the US context, there are over 25 states, which is over 40% of the US population, is currently covered by some sort of age verification law, assuming that the Kids Act doesn't pass or any further federal action doesn't happen. And as a result of that, my team wanted to know how this was actually taking place on the internet and whether or not it is actually effective, who's actually engaging in it, and how it actually works. So we performed this large-scale measurement study, which was later peer-reviewed and published at an academic security venue, a security conference. And what we did is we scanned the web from 3 states, Georgia, Texas, and New York, which are 2 states with an age verification law and 2 without. We then reverse engineered the largest age verification provider to have a better understanding of the security and privacy properties and just to figure out how it works. And I'm going to, give you a very high level overview of what we actually found. The sort of high order bit is that we found that it had somewhat limited effectiveness. The vast majority of sites that were actually required by law to have them, that were actually self-marked as being required by law to have some sort of age verification system in place, actually just doesn't bother at all. So of those that self-mark, only 14% actually use age verification. Others here spoke about bypassing the technical measures involved, but we actually just don't have to reach this. People will just go to a different site that just aren't going to comply. And this actually, if you think about it, actually isn't that surprising, right? There's an inherent incentive if a lot of the bigger actors that are sort of more obvious pull out of the market or require an age verification gate to sort of accept the traffic that would be given up by them. The second thing that we found is that these are third parties. Generally, the first party site doesn't employ age verification itself or try to provide some sort of service for this. They're actually contracting out to a third party provider that they send you to in order to do the age verification process. And this actually makes some sense, right? If you think about the complexity of all the different age verification methods that you might have and all the different requirements per the state that you're in and things like that, it makes sense that a company that doesn't deal with this would want to just have somebody else take care of the problem for them. However, there was a lot of concentration in the market, right? Over 60% of the sites we examined use one provider called Yoti. That same provider is also used by several large social media companies. I believe Meta uses them. I believe TikTok uses them, and various others. And it turns out to be a UK company. One of the higher order bits that we found, right, is that this company could effectively block your access to these sites if they so desired. They could learn your identity and they can actually learn what sites you're going to. So the marriage of those things for the topics of the sites that are covered by this is actually quite worrying. They're also like incredibly privacy invasive, right? Yoti depends on several fourth parties in order to do a lot of the actions that they take in order to verify someone's identity, depending on the method that you actually end up using. In the least privacy invasive measure, they actually get a copy image of your face and what first party website that you're going to, which is enough to be kind of concerning. We found a number of interesting sort of privacy leaks, which I'll let you look at in the paper, of various other organizations that get certain amount of, depending on the verification method that you use, get certain amount of user information and the first party site. So for example, we found that Stripe, who's a credit card processor, actually, if you use sort of credit card verification methods, would actually get the first party site that you're going to. And your bank, as part of this, would also get the fact that you're using Yoti. So this is very sort of surprising ways in which your data ends up getting leaked. So a few high order bits on looking forward. So I'm trying to be relatively brief here. There are technical ideas on moving to some more cryptographic tooling, relying on things like mobile driver's license or zero knowledge proofs in cryptography. There's some benefit to these, and they can be designed in a privacy-preserving manner, but we don't actually know how well they're going to work. And I think these are several years in the future for complete adoption. So to obviate the need for these companies and use sort of a more cryptographic method is going to take quite a bit of time. and it's not entirely clear how well they're going to work, whether or not they're going to be equally privacy invasive, and again, whether or not these third-party sites that are covered but aren't complying are going to actually use it. So it's, again, sort of limited effectiveness. And even when adopted, we're sort of still relying on these sites. There's still an interesting sort of technical and policy question as to whether or not it's a good thing. One of the things that I'm deeply concerned with this whole thing is the idea that we're relying on on sort of an identity provider to handle whether or not you should have access. But even when we move to a more cryptographic standard, we're relying on the state. And for example, if the state were to decide that I don't, for whatever reason, need to have a license, which is a thing that they need to be able to do, like fundamentally, if I should not be able to drive or something like this, they need to be able to do some sort of revocation. But that fundamentally wound up limiting my speech. If that also removes my ability to access social media sites and be able to post online, that can have like real impacts in the future. So there are some strategic directions forward. There's some the current status is incredibly privacy invasive and worrying. And I hope that we find out some better solutions soon.
Thank you, Mike. I think pervasive surveillance becomes the means of child protection here, and users are not easily able to understand or contest the inference. And then the system can encourage platforms to retain more behavioral data rather than less. And some platforms are already entrenched into this. There are different challenges here. I'm going to move on to Patricia and see if we can learn a little bit more about, are there age verification solutions that intend to let users prove only that they are above a certain age without revealing their identity? Or if I'm also very curious to understand who are these forgotten users also, because most discussions assume that everyone has some reliable documents, smartphone, and also a stable structure by which they can actually prove something. Who are the people most likely to disappear from the digital public sphere under mandatory age assurance? And how should policymakers measure that cost? Or any other thing you think which can be highlighted?
Thank you, Meshi. Hi, I'm Patricia from CIPESA. It's just an acronym for the Collaboration on International ICT Policies for East and Southern Africa. So we do work across the African continent. It's been nice listening through and getting to know, picking ideas from what other people are doing out there. And indeed, I mean, the last point we have to all agree upon is safety by design, and looking at what is coming out from these factories. It's a no-brainer. Not many of these tools or products are made on the African continent. We are merely end users. We get to use the product. So what we get is what we end up with. Now, while this whole wave, the avalanche of policies going around, I know my colleague from PIN mentioned the report they did. We've also done one. We zeroed down on 10 countries, looking at the policies they have in the different countries on the African continent, looking at child protection in online spaces. We've also worked with partners across other spheres across the globe. What comes out is we have to agree this 16 and below, it's not really going to work in the end. Kids are smarter. They're using VPNs, they're using other tools, they're using other gadgets. You have one iPad, you've put a safeguard, but the kid is using something else. So it goes back to, I think I was listening through when Michael was speaking, because when we look at the different policies that we have on the African continent, we are piggybacking on the data protection laws, which are also going back to the EU GDPR. So we're picking most of these things from Europe, right? And we do that on the African continent because we've seen in Europe, they prioritize maybe regulation and then innovation, which is different. In the US, it's mostly about innovation, and then later regulate. which now bypasses the whole point why we're doing this. The better part of all this is that I'm seeing a whole appetite from different parts of the continent and the globe. We have people from Europe, the global north, Asia, all having the same thought on protecting children in online spaces, as well as the persons with disabilities. So in the end, we'll have the solution that will work. Right now, it's the step in the right direction, having the age restriction. Is it working? Yes, we're expectant to seeing this. We have more than at least 7 countries on the African continent, quite a little, but it's something good. We have a bit more. We have Zimbabwe is part of them, Rwanda, they've mentioned Gabon, Egypt, and even Kenya has also come up with a policy on this. But the whole point goes back to safety by design. We can have these policies, then now we again struggle with the whole point of implementation. And at CIPESA, we have continued to work with parliamentarians. We've worked with global partners to look at implementation, because having a policy in place, having these laws in place, it's one thing, but implementing and seeing the road, like the full circle of what we are trying to achieve, is a whole different aspect of things. In the end, at CIPESA, we are remaining very hopeful with partners to see how this shapes out, how this rolls out. Later this year in September, we are going to be in Mauritius, rounding up over 400 participants from Africa and across for FIFA. And I promise you, this is not FIFA to do with football. It is the Forum on Internet Freedoms in Africa. And we'll be there discussing things like this. And I am happy to share that most of the sessions are also going to be talking about child protection in online spaces. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna move to Simon, back to Edri. I think I'd love to understand a little bit more about that. There has been discussion, Commission has been involved. The French experience also tells us more about development of age verification solution intended to let users prove whether they're above a certain age without revealing the identities. But that also tells us that once infrastructure exists, it can evolve into a broader digital identity system. And identity is a complicated matter everywhere these days. As much as countries are pushing for digital identity, there's also resistance, which we have seen. Generally, everyone talks about India's success with Aadhaar plus UPI, but rarely do we talk about all the problems it has created. And despite all the fanfare, how it's still not an actual identity recognized by the government. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about, is privacy preserving age assurance genuinely achievable, or this is simply replacing one form of identification with another, and technically, legally, where we should be drawing a line. And if the service providers, like the examples in the chat are being given, are constantly going to challenge what experiences reveal, how does one actually address and have those nuanced discussions which David was pointing to?
Thank you for having me. This is Simeon from EDRI, European Digital Rights. So we're based in Europe and indeed in the EU. Can you hear me correctly? Yes.
Yes, my apologies for butchering the pronunciation of
Don't
your
worry
name.
about it. Different cultures, different languages. It's perfectly fine. So on the European side, there is kind of a consensus that the age assurance methods are not really suitable with our privacy and data protection framework, because tracking, processing biometrics, predicting behavior by analyzing behavior, all this is quite invasive, and therefore what is being pushed is a solution which still relies on identity, on centralized identity, but supposedly doesn't share that identity while people prove their age. This is an idea that is being pushed by governments and the Commission in the European Union. we already have a law that will lead to soon every government having a digital identity wallet where people can sign on and prove that they are who they are online. And this the architecture of this wallet is supposedly privacy preserving. And this is what the age verification app that we're talking about in the EU is being built on in some member states or is inspired from. However, the way it's being done right now doesn't really, let's say it's privacy preserving in the intention, but not really fully in the implementation of this tool. And importantly, it's not anonymity preserving in the sense that it uses this kind of zero knowledge proof, which is a way for the service where you sign in to not know who exactly you are, other than getting the age that you want to share. But it doesn't prevent this provider and the provider of the identity to collude or to be forced to collude. So if the law enforcement, if the police wants to get both data and link them, that is still possible. There are other issues with this tool, for example, the fact that it's going to use biometrics, even though it was not supposed to. It still requires a smartphone or a phone with a camera or with a chip reader. It requires an ID most of the time. The way the government and the commission try to get around that is to say, yes, but we will make it so that you can go to the post office and they will give you a QR code to scan once that will be valid for one-time use to say this person is above or below the certain age. But of course, they don't realize and they don't say that outsourcing this task to the postal office is going to cost, and they're not prepared, I assume, to pay for that cost. So there are lots of questions about exactly how privacy preserving the tool will be, because it's only promises so far, and the demo app that we have seen is not respecting the pitch that we've heard. There's also the fact that this solution will still be circumventable because it doesn't prevent someone else from age verifying themselves on your social media account, let's say, and then handing you your phone back and saying, okay, you're age verified. And as soon as this will be done, they will try to find, the governments will then cry for more effective, non-circumventable solutions. So we're quite worried about the practicality of the tool once it's proved to be faulty by design. But this is what you get. If the tool is really anonymity preserving, if it were that good, it would still allow, and it would even more so allow the circumvention, because no one knows who is verifying their age, only that someone is verifying their age and that this is legit. And therefore, a stranger could verify their age on my phone and we would be done with it. So it's either or, and I'm afraid of what the result will be when they realize that it's a choice they have to make. In terms of European framework, I heard that there's a discussion before that there's also the idea of addressing the root cause of the problem, making the services safe, addressing the addictive design. Well, in Europe, the EU is doing both at the same time, both age verifying and imposing changes on trying to impose changes on how addictive the services are being done. So just a warning to you, if you wanted to take that route, it is not incompatible. They can still be pursued together. And actually, the European Commission is saying that age verification, on top of the other measures, is a way to make online spaces safe for young people. So we're trapped there. So yeah.
Thank you. Trapped, as we see, absolutely. I think every day there is a new regulation which tries to link digital identity created for one purpose to actually move into this age assurance thing. And then whether it is moving across borders or it is accessing your own government services and or just to exist online, all of them just continue to present these kind of challenges. And I also sometimes wonder that regulators are very quick to just throw out things without and do a lot of fear mongering. And we generally hear muted statements from companies while they secretly do what they have to do. But all of the burden is left to civil society. Tell us why this works. Tell us why this doesn't work. If you have an objection, then give us a solution. Well, you are the ones who are coming up with all of these laws and making our existence burdensome. So the burden of proof should stay on you. I'm going to ask Annette to talk a little bit about these and other kind of different challenges where we are seeing mostly about what are the principles that should guide us as this architectural shift is coming. It seems that all of us, of course, across the world are getting together today to discuss the important issue because we are seeing some form or the other being implemented in each of our jurisdictions. So, Annette, please.
Okay, hello, and good evening, good morning, and good afternoon. Now, going straight to the point, I think some of the principles that we've been working on as a country, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. So in Kenya, much as we have some legal frameworks that have been put in place, we still have had some gaps. And the principles that I think would advise that should guide discussions on the age assurance and maybe child online safety would be the best interests of the child. Now, I feel this is a core principle under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And with experience in Kenya, we also have it under the Kenya's Children's Act. So any approach should start with the best interests of the child. This means that considering not only protection from harm, but also children's rights to education and all. And then we're having also gaps that we've experienced in platform governance, where platforms are not automatically, governed to prevent children from accessing content. And so that is where privacy and data protection also comes in. And children also, we have to consider the privacy and privacy rights discussions around age assurance and consider how children's personal data is collected. And in Kenya, it aligns with the Data Protection Act. I think most of the countries' implementation of these policies is where we experience most of the challenges. And so I think one of the biggest shifts that would be experienced is basically implementation of these policies. And then inclusion and non-discrimination. In Kenya, we have experienced cases where there is serious marginalization and lack of documentation, which has really secluded or maybe put aside. And so there is no access or proper digital inclusion. And therefore, children have increasingly relied on the digital spaces just for education, communication, and creativity. But this is now narrowed down. And with the Hello. Hello.
Yeah, Annette, we lost you briefly.
Oh, sorry about that. I was talking about accessibility and digital inclusion, where children increasingly rely on digital spaces for education, communication, and creativity and access to information. So any intervention should take into account the realities of the children in digital participation. So giving again an example in Kenya where there is a transition in the education system, and most of the entire system relies on digital research. So with that accessibility comes exposure, which should again be governed. Now, we are also looking at accountability, which should remain a central principle, particularly for actors whose actions contribute to online harms. And this would include perpetrators of the abuse and digital platforms, service providers, and institutions. Finally, transparency and evidence-based policy making, participation, and allowing children and young people not to only be the subjects of the discussion of their experience, but also to participate in providing solutions. And so from my perspective, discussions on age assurance and child online safety should be guided by several key principles. The best interest of the child, privacy of data protection, proportionality, inclusion, and all that I've named. In the Kenyan context, these principles are particularly important because the child online safety intersects with broader issues of identity, documentation, and access to digital inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Annette. Wow. We, of course, are running a little over time, but which is very interesting, of course, because the discussion and it also tells you how all of us are facing similar situation, one way or the other. It really also takes me to another question. Several of us actually, I will age myself here, but several of us and several of you perhaps were not even there, but many of us discovered many communities online, and whether it is the open source movement or communities that we found, whether it is editing Wikipedia, which is now the only source of actual truth and education with verifiable sources, or open source communities when we built various kind of software and talked to each other. And that time, these were a 10-year-old in Romania could be building something and talking to a 17-year-old Linus somewhere. And that's how the infrastructure of the internet was built. Now, once we start doing this, then how does that actually work? I'm gonna just spare a few minutes to take some audience questions, if there are. If you can actually post it in the chat, that'll be also great. But if the people who spoke here have already shared a lot of information, which only speaks to how robust and rich this discussion needs to be. But if there are some questions, I would love to take at least 2-3 questions, and then we can wrap up. And we have a lot of people from different time zones. So people, I would really want to be respectful of everyone, and we can wrap it up. If there are burning questions, please let me know, raise your hands, or put them in the chat and we'll take them. Any remarks anyone would want to make, which perhaps we didn't cover or you think is important? Perhaps speakers who spoke earlier also, after you've seen. Yes, Nick, please go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to everyone so much. I think there's been a really interesting conversation between a lot of different perspectives. One thing that I've noticed as well, and James mentioned it as well, is like ensuring that children and young people play an active part in this conversation where you are. I've talked to kids about everything from like Snowden to surveillance to the Nazi pug guy in Scotland, which is another story for a different time. You learn so much about them and how they respond to this and how they consume information. I think it's such a key point. And I think also on this, I think we've got to also acknowledge that with so much attention on age assurance, these big movements by governments celebrating them, we are so much other conversations dropping off the radar. Like I don't see as many conversations about algorithmic transparency or sort of monopolistic control of social media platforms anymore. And so I think there's a need to be a lot more holistic and nuanced and detailed on this, and sort of trying to fight this being the only battle in town, because silver bullet policy making on tech it dooms us all. But yeah, but just great conversation overall.
Great, thank you. Rightly said. I think Daniel's question is absolutely on point. We all people are speaking on behalf of children about whom this entire discussion is, and they don't have the ability to influence these policies. How can they be involved? And are we including them in these discussions? How are we reaching them? Perhaps a TikTok video about this would have reached those real audience there, but they are not involved here. I'm going to have very quick remarks. Please be very, very succinct from David and James, and then we will wrap up.
I'll be super succinct. I just note with interest that no one has said the word chatbot throughout this whole conversation. And, there are so many laws that are now trying to be passed that are just, find and replace social media with chatbot. Very different rights implications. And it's a whole other piece of this that I think we can't let slide, even though we're all busy doing a million things all the time. So thank you so much for organizing this. It's been a pleasure.
Great. As your chatbot companion, whether in character AI or chat boss replaces things, things were not hard enough. David liked to make them harder. So, James.
I'd just like to end by saying, we can talk about what we're against, but the problems online are real problems that need to be solved. And I think all of us, it's imperative on us to start thinking about what the solutions are that are rights respecting solutions to these problems, whether that's interoperability, tackling big tech, looking at the economic incentives around targeted advertising, whatever it is. I think there's a real global need to put our heads together, because I'm convinced that the solutions we're doing at the moment just won't work. And I do think there's solutions out there that will work and will lead to a better internet at the end of this long process.
Okay, so thank you. There are questions on YouTube as well, because this was being live streamed. Some people have people have asked, alternatively, would you prefer to age verification to regulate social media platform, and how? This is the end of the open web, where anybody of any age can hop into a user-to-user space and contribute. Do you think that's where we are? There's some more gathering. And I think, again, how should age assurance work for conversational AI without requiring everyone to identify themselves? Should AI assistants know whether they are interacting, and does it encourage unhealthy emotional dependency or manipulation? More questions. So, anyone? I think I am going to say I am very, very delighted that the discussion is much more nuanced. We are no longer in these binaries here. As we have also seen how one bad regulation can travel to different parts of the world very quickly. Daniel's cynical question about there is significant political corruption, and that voting won't help us when the politicians are working against the voters. What can one do in such situations? A very, very timely question for those of us in India, because identity, as it is tied to electoral roles, is another issue which is erupting. And as we like to say, India is a petri dish. We're all watching the same reality TV show. Everything, India's many seasons ahead. So if it's in India, it's going to come to your nation near you as well. So a great question there. But I think Nobody, of course, everyone cares about children, and people also care about privacy. Can we genuinely achieve it in a way where we can protect children without normalizing identification for everyone else? And can we address the incentives that create online harms rather than simply placing new obligations on users? Those questions cannot be answered by tech alone, and engineering, product design, constitutional principles, and most importantly, humility, because we are making decisions that are going to be shaping how all of us interact with this great resource we've had for all this while, where many of the players are hell-bent on destroying anonymity and our access. On behalf of SFLC and all our partners, thank you to all our speakers, everybody who joined, for sharing your expertise around the world. This is obviously an important conversation. Please stay in touch. We will share notes from this conversation and anything else. Over to Pranay to close this out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mishi. Thank you to all the speakers and attendees for joining us from different parts of the world for this event. Of course, the trajectory of this conversation and Stop Killing the Internet movement does not just stop here. We look forward to seeing how the discourse develops and the movement develops across the globe. Goodbye, and hope to see you all soon again. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.